Okay, well, update on my thoughts on the Air India Flight 171 crash, the tragic crash. That's well over a month ago, probably about 5 weeks ago. So there's a lot of pilots that came out and they have contributed a lot of very good information and also explain to us the insight of how the Indian government works and how the different governing agencies played in this. Basically, the Indian government, they say, did not allow anybody else to participate. And the trouble I see is that a lot of the pilots are trained as a procedure and the systems, but I don't think they have the engineering and the physics, sufficient physics to understand beyond that what they say. Although what they say, I think, is very important because myself included, we don't know the cockpit as far as the controls and the interface that intimately. And a lot of the professional pilots also pointed out that the Indian government now came out to say that it's a couple of knobs to control the fuel, and they kind of blamed the pilot and then exonerated it at the same time. So I want to start with the prerequisite is that the Indian government and nobody, the airline, the Indian airline, the Indian government, the United States FAA, and the manufacturers based in the US. Well, not the manufacturer, but I would say the brand, because that manufacturer actually doesn't manufacture the airplanes. They assemble the parts from other people. The brand, the FAA, the United States governing body, the AAIB, the British, because there are British nationals involved, the British Aviation Air Accident Investigation Board, the Indian equivalent. In 5 weeks, nobody has said a single word until the Indian government that in about 30 days, which they're required by some rules of law to have a preliminary report, and this is exactly what they did. I think they actually came out and say in the 30 days we're going to have a preliminary report, which they actually didn't even do it in time. So without my comment is that if you're the victims, if you're public, what kind of message are they sending to you? You have any other disasters or big crimes and stuff like that, you have the head of the emergency department, whether it's United FEMA, the disaster relief, the head of that, the rescue, the emergency rescues, firefighters, police, the medical side. Every day, or maybe even twice a day sometimes, somebody would come up to update what's going on. They don't necessarily have to learn more. They just come up and say, we have been trying to look into that and we have not, we don't know anymore, and we will tell you any more if we know more tomorrow or something like that when we say. And they just tell you what they know. They tell you what's going on. And for the biggest aviation disasters, one of the biggest aviation disasters of all time, which has the least of the reason to. It is the first time in history that I know of that there is zero information. And so do you trust the information they disclosed? And a lot of other pilots who spoke out is that the information they disclosed is so minimal. Not only that you can't trust it, but even if it's true, it's so minimum and it is not clear. I'll give you an example. They said the switches were on off and then they turn it back on. That's why they blame the pilot and they say exonerated them again. Well, how did they know that? I mean, the flight recorder, once they found the flight recorder, it took them a month to tell us anything. How long does it take to download the data? Minute. And not even the victim know of any of the things, any part of the data. Why do you have to keep it, right? The public didn't ask you to translate it, just release the data. And it doesn't take a genius. They may not understand everything, but they can understand on and off. They understand high and low voltage. They understand the voice of the cockpit. The victim paid the price to go on board, and they paid the price of their life, and they get nothing. They didn't even get part of the flight. They just took off and crashed. They didn't even enjoy or feeling being airborne. Never mind getting there. And they die horribly. And they get nothing. They pay. Well, they get a horrible death. And no flight experience. And no. So this is unacceptable. But anyway, what I wanted to add is that a lot of the professional pilots say, well, those switches can't be moved so easily or bumped, and well, that is assuming the official claim that the fuel cutoff they're not switches, they are okay. So to be exact, this is where the engineering comes on. There are knob, dials, and switches. The difference is knobs are just something that protrudes, and it can normally a knob is maybe something you push or something you twist. Or, there's a lot of distinction of the how they move, but it's simply something that protrudes. A lever is something with a rod or a long, is something that is slender, the degree of slenderness, and it sticks out. And when you move it, that pivots. It sort of pivots like a seesaw. A dial is something that is circular or disc shape, and you twist it, it spins along the axis of the center of the circle. Okay, a switch is something that you toggle between different, normally about 2, maybe 3 positions. Center, up or down. So that would be not like a light switch. A light switch is actually kind of a lever. A switch is, I suppose, something that you would. Okay, so a light switch is it's sort of a hybrid between a button and a switch, because you're pushing both directions. A lever is that you can apply force from either under, above, or left or right, both sides of the movement. So it's not there's a huge clear thing, but certainly a switch or a lever is definitely not a dial. And this is important because this goes to show how they can be moved. A perfectly circular dial is very difficult to bump unless it has some features that sort of sticks out, like a pointer or something like that. A lever, on the other hand, can be easily bumped. So is a switch, especially if the switch is moved by pushing towards it. A lever, similarly, hitting from one side. A dial is hard to bump depending on how tight it is. I mean, you could if you sort of rub against one edge. So they all can be, but the dial is in some way harder. But it's also more difficult to distinct the position unless it has a detent or datant on the positions. So let's be clear. There are a lot of people, you got to understand. Both people call this a switch. Well, its functions as a switch, which means a switch is either on or off. A dial can be graduated, and so can be a lever. But a switch is a definite position. There's a value on each. There can be combinations, like a flap lever. You can move between, and there's a detent. You between 5 degrees and 10 degrees, between 10 degrees and 15, and obviously you can move seamlessly between the different degrees. But when you lock it into a detent or detent or detent, then it's fixed on that position. There can be a combination. But so let's just get it clear. This fuel control, one would say, shouldn't say control, but because it doesn't directly control it, but the control that signals the computer, that is in the form that it has a function of a switch. The way it sends a signal is a switch because it's either on or off. But the mechanical movement is a lever. Okay? So you gotta understand it's a lever that operates as a switch. And one position is on, the other one position is off. So basically, towards the top, which is away from the ground, like towards the ceiling, the front of the ceiling, because it's angled. But if you look at it, either towards the nose of the airplane, towards the ceiling, it's on. Towards the floor of the airplane, it's off. And that lever cannot just be switched. And another pilot says that it must be pulled up or this and that. Well, no, up. It must be pulled out. Okay, out, not up. Up is an on position, so that the freedom. So out is perpendicular to the position, the direction which it slides. Okay, which is away from the surface which is mounted. So if you would put it away from, so put it out, and then you can move it up or down. If it's on the up, then you can further move it up. If it's down, you can't move it further down. But to move it in another position, you must pull it out. Just like if you go to a gym, these devices have these adjustments for your seats and the weight and things like that. You have a pin, okay, that sets a position or mount the number of weight. This is exactly how it works. You pull the pin out before you can slide it, just like gym equipment. So these pilots were saying, seasoned pilots saying, oh, it's impossible to just bump it. You have to deliberately. You can't do it in a certain time. Well, yeah, when things are pretty normal, but you're not in that airplane, okay? And you say, well, it was fine to flight before. Well, you don't know that. And the other thing is just because it's fine on the flight before doesn't mean it's fine on this flight. I mean, things always were intact before they were broken, just like your car. It's not like that, well, if the car is working all fine, today, and tomorrow nothing goes wrong, right? When nothing goes wrong, it was working just before. So that logic is also erroneous. It's totally an error, it's wrong. For these pilots to say that, well, it can't possibly, slide away from it for accident. You don't know that, okay? So that is one error. It can. It's a possibility. You don't know if something is defective. In fact, they now found that there's FAA and CAA directive to say that these knobs made by the manufacturer or by the company of this brand, they need to be inspected daily because they go wrong. And the reason is because maybe you don't know how dodgy the mechanism is. It takes a spring for it to put it back into the notch. Well, how do you know the spring don't fail? Maybe it's a cheap spring. Maybe the spring is mounted in such a way it will slide out of where it is pushing against. It can happen, right? Easily. It's like if you have a spring, they go over a rod, and the both ends are bigger to have the spring's end to push it to. Well, in an airplane, it's very small amounts of space. If you look at inside the center console, there's not a lot of room for all the stuff they crammed in. So to save weight and material and room, they could easily have made such that the spring could have easily slid off. It may not be immediately, but after several wiggles over the day, it can. Maybe the spring is missing, right? So anyway, things can go wrong, right? They were always fine before they go wrong. So just to say that they were fine before, then how does it go wrong? Yeah, that has nothing to do with it. Of course they were fine before. Because if they weren't fine, they can't go wrong, right? I mean, when something goes wrong, it can't get more wrong. When it's broken, it can't get more broken. It just broke, okay? So So that's you get that over it. So these people are totally in error. You weren't in the airplane. You don't know if that switch is broke. Okay. Secondly, is that you don't know where the contacts of these switches are. For the safety, you're not going to make a contact as only. So yeah, where was I? So you're not going to make that contact only if you've possibly reached the very end of that switch. You pull out any sort of normal appliances, whatever switch you are, right? It's like a light switch. It's not like you just touch it, it goes off, or you touch it, it goes on, right? I mean, if you just touch it from off, they would, touch it. Well, so touch it from. Get it from on, you have to move a little bit before it goes off. So it's quite possible these levers could make contact just before they get to where the very end where they reach the detent or the detent which they would be able to lock in there. So if these levers were, obviously they're under tension to pull them into the center console. So if they have to be pulled out to move. So if they were sliding between the slots or the detents, then obviously they were under a bit of friction, touching the slot, the flange of the levers, which is touching the slot, so there's a bit of friction. So if you let it go before it reaches the detent, it would not just, slop and just freely fall down. I mean, I don't know, but from what I predict, what about mechanical stuff, like the gym equipment that has a spring on it, it would just be pulled towards the surface of the track to travel. It would just be sort of held there loosely by a little bit of friction. So when your airplane is traveling, you can see that the way it took off quite positively. By that I mean is that you're traveling up to speed, and you can see the airplane point its nose, translate to point its nose quite high, and it goes from going straight into the air horizontally to pulling the nose up high in a very short time. So it rotates the nose upwards quite rapidly, and you can see how the wings bend and the dust fly off because when the wings deflect the air downwards and blow all the dust up and all that. That's not just all the engines, but a lot of that is actually the wings. So that changes the rapid increase of the angle presented to the air, also represented a rapid increase in lift to pull the airplane up. So it's like in a very fast accelerating elevator or escalator that you're sitting in there, you're being pulled up quite rapidly. And so if those levers are just sort of held there by a little bit of friction from the springs, they're pulling them in, rubbing against the walls of the track, certainly that would help them to move down towards the floor to the opposition. And don't forget too, those levers are facing back, like 45 degrees up towards the ceiling of the cabin. When it's on. When it's on off, it's like 45 degrees towards the floor of the airplane. So when the airplane, and it's behind the pilot's seat, so you can't see it. So nobody, you can't just say, well, they're possibly in the detent. Nobody knows that. So if they're true, what the Indian government said that is true, the fuel would cut off. They claim the levers will move down. Then obviously that force, that G force would help to move them. And it's also that another two factors is that given the angles at which these switches are protruding 45 or so degrees, diagonally upwards toward the rear ceiling, when the airplane nose up, now on the on position or somewhat towards on position, now that lever is relative to the ground, or the way the airplane accelerates, the g-forces, is now sticking almost horizontal, like 90 degrees towards the forces, which helps it to make it much easier to succumb to the g-forces. And especially, and then the third thing is that if the airplane was lifting up fast enough, transition to lift off fast enough, that the landing gear telescopic, spring telescopic struts of the landing gear, it lifts off before the landing gear strut hits the bottom of the extension, then there will be a little bit of a vibration or thump, which is fine, which is normal by structural and sense. But that little thump, that little knock vibration, is like your car going over a little bump, or maybe a tiny, like a piece of trash or something like that. You can feel there's a bump, and that little vibration or little bump would also, dislodge the shock, would make the levers go down. So it's perfectly possible. It's not what autopilots say. That is perfectly possible, because I don't think that the switches have to be in the detent for the fuel to for the computer to pick up the signal to be on. It just has to be somewhat on the up. I don't think there's a contact to show that it's in the detent. I mean, there's just one switch, right? If every single switch and levers in the cockpit has 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different sensors, the cockpit would be 5 times the weight. And I doubt the assembler manufacturers will ever go over that. I mean, the whole idea is to be more fuel efficient and make more money, right? But anyway, I diverge. So I oppose the I'm not opposed to the other pilot, but I think the other pilots, their piloting experience, cockpit experience is amazing. But I think with the additional more engineering, mechanical and physics information, they can also see, or anyone can see, that that's perfectly possible. Again, do I trust, after having 30 days, not a single word from any authorities, any manufacturers, 0 word? Do I trust any of them? I mean, they obviously have something to hide. I mean, to me it is. I mean, it seems a signal of that. What is better to blame the pilot? And then, if that's really clever, you blame the pilot and they exonerated them because they would bump off. Somebody switch it off and they just turn it back on again. And they say, well, the airplane managed to restart on its own, and further saying, oh, great, the manufacturer did a great job, the airplane restarted itself. At that part of it, see, that's why I don't believe in any of them. I don't believe the engine restarted itself at all. Not only do you don't hear the sound, but if the engine went to full thrust on one engine, I think the left engine, the airplane is such a high angle. The airplane's already on the edge, already stalled. Okay. So if one engine developed develop power, the airplane would immediately yaw right. The left wing would go up, almost trying to get to the spin. These engines are so powerful. The engine wouldn't fly. The airplane wouldn't fly, but it suddenly would turn or roll in some way. That did not happen, and there's no rudder movement you can see. So I think that, to me, is totally unbelievable. So with all the prerequisites that they didn't say a single word before the 30 days, and the only thing they say is that the pilots, they say the pilot turned off the switch and then they turn it back on. The airplane restarted itself. And the other thing that I find is totally unbelievable. They say on the dock on some of the official, the other pilot, Gary B or something like that, he said, the pilot said, why did you turn it off? And they didn't even name which pilot, because they didn't want to give them a bad name. See, another way to hide, they not every single case, the recorder say the co-pilot say that, the captain say that, right? They didn't even say who said what, And one pilot said, why did you turn the fuel off? And the other pilot said, I did not do so. Come on, man. I mean, who says that? You're not Captain Picard. In an emergencies like that, I mean, there's not, even if it's a first language, nobody says that. In emergency situations like that, they said, I didn't do it. Oh, I didn't, right? Oh, I did not do so. I mean, come on. Who says that? Nobody does, you know? So, you know, to me, it might as well just forget about it. Basically, it's the same thing. Is that the explanations are not acceptable, and they're not clear, and they show signs of untruth, and they didn't do their responsibilities, and it's not acceptable for the public, especially to the passengers, and that's how I see it. And so again, what's the definition of safe? I don't know about you, but I would think that that's pretty unsafe. So yeah, and in 30 days, this gives you like 2 lines, and then you hear nothing. They say, well, they're going to publish the full report within a year. Is that how you treat the passengers and the victims? That you know, there's no weekly, there's no hourly, daily, or weekly update until the last minute of what the rules and laws require, that you have to preliminary report for 30 days, and you just give them a few lines, and then which are not clear and is seemingly made up, and then they say, well, they will have a full report for in a year. How is that acceptable? So, yeah. So you guys make up your mind. It's really sad, I would say, on the bright side. Is that I never did look into these things, but now I kind of look into a little bit about the 787 on the whole. It's actually a really amazing idea, and I can see that a lot of really amazing engineers were behind it. But I think the story went to the company skipped a lot of the good ideas and went to the basic Home Depot solutions. I shouldn't say Home Depot, so scratch up, but hardware store solutions to make it easier to push through the door, deliver it, and not having to go through certification, which we know that Boeing fraudulently did that and be trialed as a crime. And yeah, they were not able to get away from it. They were on deferred. So basically, Boeing is by definition a criminal organization. So that's why I'm sure they don't want to say anything about it, and the Indian government didn't say anything about it. This formula is great. Nobody says anything about it. The manufacturer, the brand doesn't have to be liable. The airline doesn't have to be liable. They blame the pilot, exonerated him, and so it's kind of they got away, and then the Indian government got away. We're stuck by the rules. We give a preliminary report within 30 days, and then we're going to have a full report in a year. But I think the people, all of us as consumers, the people, especially the victims, it's not even unacceptable. It's beyond unacceptable by a million times. And if you really think further, it's like, you don't have to know anything about the airplane. All you know is that this is not acceptable. How can a perfectly intact airplane, supposedly controllable, with the most reliable advanced engine, just rotate, got off the ground, within about 2 wingspans height, and just fall off the sky? It didn't even fly. And everybody died. And their explanation was a couple of knobs. Okay? So, this is not the public department. This is not anybody's department. The manufacturer, the CEO of Boeing, the one that went out because of all the things he did, had to resign. He went on in the Senate hearing. Do you know how much money he made? Salary he made? $34 million. $34 $34 million US salary. Probably that's the base salary. And you couldn't even make it. You actually, your job was to deliberately lie to the public, and to the pilots, and hide things about the airplane that was not good, so that it can be easily certified as an airplane that isn't. And over 350 people died. And that's okay. So the public is not supposed to know that. The public doesn't need to know that. These people, the CEO got paid, the last CEO got $34 million US a year. The one now is probably more. You paid 100 times more than what it takes to make sure the airplane is safe. We have had over 120 years since the invention of the airplane, since the Wright brothers. 122 years, 122 years to be precise. We know how to make safe airplanes a long time ago. Aviation, in all the parts in fact, aviation is a very unforgiving business, and that's why it's from the very beginning, aviation and aircraft manufacturing is a minimum 100% business. There are things that most of the things are have to be a minimum of 100%, if not 200, 300, or 1,000%. Yeah, I mean, things that you don't have to be 100% is like, if you paint the side of the airplane, the logo is not, within a couple of millimeters or whatever. That's not what I mean. But you screw things together the way that they're made. They have to be the right size and dimensions, and they can't have cracks, and they have to be, the mechanical parts, the electrical parts, the fuel, the engine, everything has to be at least 100%. In fact, they have to be way more than 100%, because they're just 100% when they leave the production. How many percent do you think they are when they deliver it? How many percent they are when they're ready for flight? How many percent do you think they are after use, day in and day out, in outside the environment? You don't realize how stringent making airplanes and making airplane components and engines and materials are. The modern days airplanes are there's massive things. Some of the parts are actually engineered down to the atom. It's incredible, and it's so easy for these, again, like the Senate hearing, they grill the CEO. It's like, are you an engineer? No, I'm not. What are you doing at the helm of an engineering firm that doesn't even know anything about engineering? How can you make it safe? How can you make decisions? He's just, these people are just, from what you can see, they're just making financial decisions. They don't even make the airplane themselves. Everything is contracted around the world. Some of them even made in China. That's why you got like doors falling off. You got airplanes dive to the ground on its own. Everything is fudged. And so don't be fooled. It should be safe. And things that revolve so much, the ability to make safe airplane and the ability to go 1,000% of things have been around since, or even before World War II, almost 100 years in the case. In the beginning, the Wright brothers, when they make the airplane, even selecting the pieces of wood. It's not like they just chop down any wood. Every piece of wood has to be inspected. Make sure all the grains and the density and the strengths are right before you can put it together, even though they're just sticks. And to go from the ability to make things hundreds of percent beyond what your minimum needs to be safe, to the point where the airplane is not even put together with missing bolts and forced together, that are fighting, the parts of major parts are fighting each other, trying to break away from each other and stressing each other out before they even fly, before they even have the first flight. That is a crime, and the Department of Justice sees it as a crime. But they were too big to fail, so they just got a deferred prosecution. That's why they don't say anything, because you really think that the airplane was perfect when they leave the factory? Every single thing was correct? I don't know. But there are a lot of people come out and say that there are a lot of things wrong with them, even when it's new. So, but anyway, besides the point, I wanted to say back is that one, the public should pay the fare, and the expectation is a safe flight, and we have the technologies and the know-how to do that. We have been doing that for a long time, making flights perfectly safe. So this was not delivered. They don't deliver anything near 100% safety, but they demand the fare-paying passengers that 100% of them pay 100% of the fare. You know, they don't say, oh yeah, only about 95% of the passengers credit card roll through. The rest of them, yeah, just come on board. We're happy to fly you. Or 25% of them roll through and say, yeah, the rest of you, since you're here, doesn't matter. 20%, transaction is fine. Complain? No. They want every single penny before you can get on board. And a lot of times these days, even if you pay first class for any reason, they kick you out. Okay, but when you take off, they're not obligated to deliver any promise to you that you're ever going to make it to your destination. And if you do, to be intact, you could be half dead. Okay, so anyway, that's what I think about it. Again, this video has no claim or anything. It's just voice and pixels. It's not for education or information or entertainment or anything. It's just sound and pixels. But if you guys can derive any value from it, then it's great. So please, if you be so kind, do the thumbs up, like, and subscribe, and that's how you can keep the channel going. I would look forward to any comments. Thank you guys. Bye. Oh yes, don't forget to stay tuned. I will have more related things to say about this, but I don't want to be dwelling too much on the crash and this tragedy, because so far I really think that this is not right, it's not fair, not even there is a molecule of fairness and justice in this, and I don't find any of the official narratives credible. There's no way it can be credible. The data, the black box disappeared for months, and the under armed guard, they flown to one of the two. They're both the duplicates. The voice and the data were in one, and they have two of them. And they were flown to the U.S. to D.C. under armed guard with the Indian Air Force, and they got back and nobody else seen it. So nobody can authenticate the data, and I know, given again the zero action by any of the authorities and the brand and the government, I find and the result of the airline and the history of the airline, and to show that all these things that has to be fixed, recommended by the government, all the defective things that are officially shown on paper, and the things have not been done to the airplane to keep it running correctly, and all that I find I do not accept that I would not consider that flying is safe, at least not in that kind of airplane with that kind of airline. I do not find any of the information given by the authorities credible. So that's all. Basically, all I really wanted to say about it. And so subsequently, whatever they say is still not credible. All the passengers and the public should know is that this day and age, we are at least half a century beyond what what we can expect 100% safe flight, unless some catastrophe in the sky like in the movies or whatever. You should arrive quite well 100%. There should not be disasters like that. It should never be. And anything less than that, it's like my previous episode, unless commercial aviation is as safe as birds flying, and birds never crash, even in a storm. You ever seen them trying to catch a branch on a tree, land on a branch on a tree, even in the worst storms, slip off and just hit the ground and drop dead? They don't. If so long it's not as safe as that, or same person walking on firm flat ground, the person is not going to fall off. So long that if it doesn't reach that level of safety, then the ability to expect that kind of safety, I do not accept commercial aviation as safe, and that's that. But that's not necessarily your definition. It is your decision on what, it's up to you what kind of research and information that you take in to decide for yourself the degree of safety. But to me, it's like there's no such thing as degree of safety when it comes to flying. There's either a safe, which is 100% or beyond, or it is a degree of risk. So it's up to you whether you think safety for aviation is a degree of safety, or it is a safety or a degree of risk, or a combination of a degree of risk and degree of safety. And it's up to you to decide what kind of risk you are willing to take for whatever the activity that you take on. And it's up to you to find out, to find the information to support what you consider safe and unsafe, or somewhere in between. I'm just kind of sharing what I think and what I know, but again, in the end, this is not even that. It just sound. Ultimately, it just sound and pixel has no claim to truth or anything like that. But again, thank you so much for listening, and please stay tuned. I would have. I don't want to get into this topic too much, because none of the information comes in I consider as credible. But I would touch on other subjects related to that, or maybe aviation and airplanes. Anyone want to know questions? I'm really more than happy to answer them. Maybe suggest other topics I would get in. I would more than happy. Aviation, luckily, because of the others' effort, by and large, is still very near 100% safe activity. And there are a lot of positive things to go from, and a lot of other things to attain and to enjoy. So, but we can't let people like that to die in injustice or in vain. So there are both sides to it. But I like to move on from that. But I would move on, but not abandon this topic. So yeah, thanks for.
Just adding a little bit of a further thought. Is that you're telling me an airplane, 350 people, something around that big airplane crashed. Didn't even get flying, crashed on takeoff because there's a couple of knobs. How many knobs and switches and dials inside the cockpit? Have you ever seen it? It's like an entire. It's like hundreds of hundreds. It's like a constellation of switches, knobs, and dials. And if two of the knobs can kill everybody on board, we have a problem. Of course, there's some pilots and people come out and talk about that there is official FAA and CAA advisories on the computer chips that control the engine, and they say that they needed to be, and also the fuel levers themselves need to be checked every day, and the computer software, some people say that it needs to reset every 51 days. That means that they kind of go crazy after a few flights. A lot of other things, and then a lot of people mentioned that how the 787 when it takes off, it goes from ground to air mode. Once it lifts off the ground, and there's a switch somewhere, in the wheel well. Then when the wheels, or somewhere in the landing gear, then the landing gear feels that it's no longer pushing against the ground. Then it changes the engine control to flight mode. What the word is that? Why do you need a ground mode and a flight mode? And even if you do, you're not a fighter jet, you only have so much power. You push the lever forward, has more power. You pull the lever backwards, it has less power. And you have a pilot, right? What is that mode for? And why does it rely on a little switch out on a wheel well, exposed the day in and day out, sitting in airports and weather and stuff like that? Why does it change the control logic? You're basically changing to a different software at the most critical time. Once the airplane just lift off, the wheels lift off the ground, you change it at that. Why do you do that? How many clever things that these smart computer people invented that we don't know of, that we don't need? However, I have to say that again, if the official narrative is true, which I don't trust it, they said the airplane, restarted, the engines restarted on their own. Well, the restarting feature is really great, but if it restarted it within that short time, that would be amazing, because I don't think any human can do it that rapidly. But again, I don't believe that, because the airplane does not show the sign of any asymmetric thrust down to the last minute. So if one of the engine got started developing thrust, and it was at that high angle, and the wings are not doing anything, with no lift, it can't resist any asymmetry. The airplane will have roll and yaw. So I don't believe that either. I don't know much about a 787. Never sat in a cockpit. Didn't know, other than what I see online and through the pictures and stuff like that. So I really don't know that much, and I hope that those of you who do know would contribute. But I'm sure, the great things and the not so great things about a 787 can fill libraries. But all I'm just saying is that the public should, the airlines, the government, and the brand of this kind of thing should be trusted, and aviation should be at minimum 100%. 100% is actually a fail grade. So obviously a whole bunch of things would be below 100%, and that's why this happened. Then it should not. Again, I don't want to sound like a broken record. That would be all for this episode. I will be touching up to related topics on this, but not dwell too much on this, because I think it's really pointless in a way, other than the fact that this should not happen and this is not right. Because I don't trust, and I think the official narratives have zero credibility. So you got something to go on, so people can go on, forever about theories. So I'm not into that. Anyway, stay in touch. I hope you guys like, comment, and subscribe, and really, probably comments I would really like to. Anything, questions I might be able to answer, or topics that you want me to expand on, anything related to aviation, airplanes, physics, and science, all for that. So I like to have some more positive videos on aviation and aeronautics or aerospace. That's it. Thank you, guys.